So let's dive into today's topic. As I mentioned before, today is Secure by Design, all about threat modeling for developers. And with us today, I'm very excited to share that we have experts Robert Hurlbut and John Taylor. So before we dive into the meat and potatoes of today, I'd like to give you guys the opportunity to introduce yourselves a little bit more than where you're based out of or calling in from today. So Robert, why don't we start with you? Tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got into threat modeling and what you're bringing, your interest in today's topic is.
Sure, Katie. Thank you. Appreciate it. Yeah, so Robert Hurlbut, and so where I work is at Torion, and just joined that company. It's a cybersecurity company that also does a lot of threat modeling training. I'm a principal product security architect and threat modeling trainer there. But as you mentioned, I've not always been doing threat modeling. My background is longtime software developer and architect, many, many years doing that. But about 20 years ago or so, I started looking more at application security. And in particular, I first learned about threat modeling. There was a great book that came out around 2003 or so. And there was a little bit of talk about also about building security in from Gary McGraw in his book. And that really impacted my work and the way I looked at things. And I was sold on it. Once I learned about, hey, there's a different way to build solutions here. There's a different way to think about this stuff. And so I started implementing threat modeling or
Mhm.
applying it, learning about it, telling others about it. I did some sessions where I would speak at different user groups locally where I lived at the time in the Boston area in Massachusetts.
Mhm.
And then fast forward a few years later, I sort of decided, this is it. I'm sold on threat modeling. I'm going to do this pretty much full time and helping lots of developer teams. I was also doing some development still at the time as well, but mostly transitioning to helping lots of teams through training, speaking at conferences, and doing some writing and so forth. And that sort of took me into where I am today. I've Along the way I've helped build the threat modeling program at Bank of America. I most recently helped build the threat modeling program at CMS through a small cybersecurity company called Acquia. And of course, now I'm at Torion, where I'm continuing to do training and helping lots of teams with threat modeling.
Thanks for being here. And it's just nice to know that it started with a book, right? So it can happen to you too, for those at home.
Absolutely.
John, what about you? Tell us a little bit
Yeah,
about yourself.
my story is a little different, but nonetheless, so I do work at Deloitte. I'm on the internal side of Deloitte, so my customers are all the folks that are working for customers. So, and I lead the threat modeling program there, and I'm also the application security and design leader as well. So we deal with other issues more than just threat modeling, other programs that we run and operate. And so I've been doing this here for quite some time now. I'm getting close to 7 years here, I think, or just after 7 years. In terms of threat modeling, I have an interesting story. My background, in cyber started kind of midway. So it's a second career for me, but it's interesting how they tie in. So I worked in the financial sector, so at a regional bank. I can't remember the amount of assets, but it was pretty large, lots of locations in a region in the DC metro area, actually. So, Katie, you probably may be familiar with them.
Yeah.
But and then from there, I got into the manufacturing sector where I did incident response, security awareness. I've worn a lot of hats, but then it came to application security, and that's kind of where I've really found my home. And threat modeling became a more official thing that I'm doing. In my previous career, I worked in the motion picture industry, and I was a film editor for a long time. But I was heavily involved in the creation of the technology and the process is being used, when it came from old-fashioned film into kind of the modern day and age of computers and digital mediums. We were designing and building systems, and there was a point in time dealing with piracy and, where people are making illegal copies and things. So we came up with ways to prevent that from happening. And so we looked at designs of systems and functions. We were actually working as architects in terms of systems, and then also looking at the security aspects. And little did I know that eventually that was threat modeling. I didn't know it had a name for it at the time. This is something I spoke about on the first keynote. Robert, you and I were there on that ThreatModCon. That was a couple of years ago. But it's interesting kind of how I evolved into this. And, now, of course, I've got a team. We work across the globe. We support a lot of folks. So it's a very large, expansive program that we've been building over time. So, I've done other webinars and stuff as well. So that's kind of a bit of my story and where I'm at today. So that's basically it.
I love how both of you just have that curiosity. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
With either job that you have, it was just the curiosity to go full down the rabbit hole that led you kind of to where we are today. So
Absolutely.
I'm grateful for that curiosity and for you guys being here today. So let's dive in. For those of you at home, we're going to start off with a poll. I thought it would be best for Robert and John to see kind of where the knowledge level is, or kind of where everybody is at home in regards to their thoughts on threat modeling. So we're going to do 3 polls real quick. All right, I promise, time me. But one, let's start with, how familiar are you with threat modeling? A, never heard of it. B, I've heard of it, but never done it. C, I've participated in a session. Or D, I've regularly led threat modeling. It's always fascinating watching the results come in. It's like, we should have Jeopardy music or something, I think.
I think we've been on one that's done that before.
I got to work on that. So we have the bulk of the answers in, and it's, I've heard of it, but never done it. We do have about 30% that said I've participated in a session. And then we have about 15 who regularly lead threat modeling. So it's a good mix, but predominantly I've heard of it, but never done it.
Okay.
All right, so let's go on to the next one. Who leads threat modeling at your company? A, security teams. B, developers. Or C, it's collaborative. Or D, nobody yet. And this is one I'm most curious about to see.
Yeah.
Because it's always an interesting mix. And it looks like we're fairly split. Yep, wait, just a little bit more. All right, so we got about 35% with security team, 15% developers, 22% is collaborative, and also 22% nobody yet.
Got it.
All right.
Excellent. It's a nice kind of distribution there.
Yeah, it's a good mix. All right, and then last one I promised before we dive in is, what's your biggest challenge with threat modeling? A, don't know where to start. B, lack of time or prioritization. C, team collaboration. D, choosing the right framework or tool. Or E, we don't do it at all yet. All right. And again, it's looking like we're about evenly split here. So it's pretty much split between all of them. I would say team collaboration, choosing the right framework or tool, and we don't do it at all yet, though, are an even split. With 27%, though, the most common answer was lack of time or prioritization. All right. So thank you for those of you at home for humoring us and just letting us level set real quick for our experts. But let's dive in. So, Robert and John, you're here to talk about threat modeling today. What exactly is it, and why should a developer team care?
Oh, John, I'll let you start off.
I wasn't sure who was going to start here, though. Yeah. Thanks, Robert. So threat modeling, what is it? I like to think about this, from there's a fundamental 4-question framework, which I guess we talked about, that came from Adam Shostak. But ultimately, what we're trying to do is understand what is the product or system that we're building, and trying to identify what weaknesses may exist based on that design and function. We have different components and parts of an application system. I'm saying system as well because it applies to many different categories and areas. But really kind of getting a good baseline of what is that, and then thinking about, what goes wrong. So what are those weaknesses that exist? Let's find those. Let's talk about them. Let's understand what they are. And then we then dive into the element of, like, how do we deal with this? And basically from there, it's like looking at mitigations, looking at controls, and saying, oh, you know what? Maybe we should not build this way. maybe we need to change the approach of how this functions and works. So, and that kind of goes into a lot of different areas. If you think about infrastructure, you think about the programming in itself and its structure, you think about data and what's going on there and access. There's a lot of factors that go into looking at that design that we do. And threat modeling helps us pinpoint those. It helps us look at those things and help us prioritize. Like, does this weakness over here really that exploitable, or is this one over here kind of the big area where it's really more critical, and that if we don't do this, then all these other things can be impacted in such a way that really can, have bad results in the situation. So what we're doing is identifying these things now while we look at designs, while we're building, so we can adjust for and help us all along the way. And ultimately, we wind up with a design of a product that is more secure. It's there from the start. Everybody talks about secure by design. Well, how do we do that? And this is what threat modeling helps us accomplish. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. I don't know.
Would you say you're a bit of a doomsday prepper then with coming up with these situations?
I think all cybersecurity folks have a tinfoil hat, on their head sometimes. I'm just kind of joking, but I wouldn't say doomsday kind of attitude. I think it's more around looking at the aspects of when we understand what's happening, we really want to focus in on what we're going to do. How do we make this better, right? And so it's a different outlook. Like, we know bad things can happen, but how do we look at things that we do well that improve that, Does it make sense? I guess that may make sense. Robert, you probably have some thoughts on that as well.
No, I 100% agree. Some other things I think about, everything was spot on that John mentioned. Some other things that I like to highlight is that we already have some aspect of threat modeling that we do pretty much in our lives every day.
Yeah.
When we go outside, let's say go out of our home, and if we want to maybe cross the street, what do? You're looking around. Why? Because cars can come by.
Yeah.
And so you're doing that thinking ahead. You're what happens? What could go wrong here if I just simply step out and don't look?
Mm-hmm.
And that's threat modeling. That's thinking about potential threats. In this case, those cars that are driving along. It's thinking about our own safety and security, and how do we protect ourselves? What do we need to do? Those are those mitigations or those countermeasures. We look around, and then once we've done that, we then act. And again, that's a bit about what threat modeling is. And so you apply that to systems. You're looking at the system. You're thinking about, again, what could go wrong? What could happen? How do we deal with those things? And understand how to proceed forward and do so. And the other thing I'll mention as well is that, and I think there may be this already coming across, but I think it's key to mention is that threat modeling is a thinking tool. There are a lot of other great security tools that we are aware of, tools that help scan our code, that maybe try different vulnerabilities to see if those are present in our code or in our applications, and you can automate those. Threat modeling is different than those in that it's something that you can do without any tools per se, other than just your mind and thinking about scenarios and
Yeah.
doing brainstorming and working with others. And so, and the other great thing is that you can do that early. Maybe you don't have an application yet. You just need to think about what's it going to do. Or maybe you have a new feature that you're trying to add, or something else that is of concern to you. Maybe you heard about it in the news and, oh, are we impacted by that? And you can think through those scenarios and then go do some checking on it. And so it really truly is the start of thinking about these things and then verifying and validating and see how it can impact your design. So that's another aspect. Just to to throw it out there, I know it's one of our resources. The Threat Modeling Manifesto, I was one of the co-authors of that. we had a definition: threat modeling is analyzing representations of a system to highlight concerns about security and privacy characteristics. Really, just to summarize that, those representations, that's the modeling. That's the uh, thinking, the what does this system do? How does it work? And so that's really the start of it, is getting into that mindset, or and already really we have it. We already do that every day, and then applying that to our systems.
Hey,
That's a
Robert.
great. Oh, go ahead,
I was
John.
just going to add something. So, Robert, what you mentioned about crossing the street, we actually use that as an example when we're starting to teach threat modeling in our
Yep.
organization, because we all do this every day. We just don't realize it, in terms of how we're approaching and looking at things from a risk-based perspective of what can happen to me. So, and one of the exercises, we actually walk through that and discuss what are all the things that can happen. So, but we think that so quickly when we go to cross the street, it's so ingrained in our mindset that we all have this natural ability to make these decisions quite rapidly. So we think about that, how that applies across how we're doing this and what we wind up doing. I love that
And
example. Yeah. So, but thanks
and
for
I
that.
was
I think I got it from you, John.
Oh, that may have been.
I think
Yeah,
we talked about it, and I said that's a
yeah,
great
yeah, we
that's
have.
a
Yeah,
great.
I think we
And then
have talked about
now it's part of my own.
no, no, use it, please, by all means.
And I'm glad you brought that up because I was going to say that was my takeaway is I didn't realize, you could equate it to that because you are making those decisions
Yeah,
second by second every day. And I never really thought about threat modeling like that. So I'm definitely going to have that seared in my brain from now on.
good. Absolutely.
How
Good.
does threat modeling differ from traditional risk assessments? So you've talked about how it's a thinking exercise and there's all these decisions that go into it, but how is this different from what developers or security professionals think is a traditional risk assessment?
Robert, you want to start off with that one?
Sure. Well, interestingly enough, there's certainly a little bit of overlap. When you're determining risk, you're thinking about those possibilities, or end probabilities of something happening, and you want to try to get to a place where you determine, is this severe in terms of, if that happened, this particular event happening, and how do you do that? um, on the flip side of that, when you're thinking about threat modeling, you're thinking about the threats, you're thinking about potential mitigations or countermeasures, and that's really helping prepare for understanding risk. So you think about the possibilities. So the threat model helps you think
Yeah,
about the possibilities, but then risk helps you then determine, okay, what's actually probable? What could
Yeah.
happen here if that was, real, if you will. And so there's a lot of possibilities. A bear could come in and eat all my food at the picnic. Yes, that's certainly a possibility. But if my picnic is indoors somewhere far away from the forest, the probability of that bear doing that, or any bear doing that, is probably very low. And that's where you talk about risk. And so they certainly have a relationship between each other. Is that in order to do good risk management or thinking about risk, you need to think about the actual threat events and understand them. And in order to have a really good final threat model, you should also think about not just the threats, but what's the risk associated, what could happen, or what's the
Mm.
possibility, or sorry, probability of this happening. And so those two go hand in hand, but they just come at it things slightly differently. And but that's some of the relationships that I've seen. John, what are your thoughts?
yeah, no, very similar in that sense. And one of the things that I find that by threat modeling, as opposed to the standard assessments of like going through like a security requirements, reviews, performing application scans and pen testing and walking through all of these things, when you discover things at this later stage, and it's like, okay, let's go fix this, prioritize this, we have this critical vulnerability, let's go patch this, or whatever that solution may be. Whereas in threat modeling, you're getting ahead of that. So you're really looking at what the things that can happen to you down that road. So effectively, I don't know if it's predicting the future, but it's effectively saying, hey, this can happen. That probability is likely, and here's where it lives. Let's address it while we're creating this product Otherwise, it may show up on your scan, your pen test, or whatever. I mean, I've got plenty of examples where we found that we were brought in late stage for a particular mobile application, and then when we looked at that, we basically were like, okay, so here's things that we discovered based on design and function rather than all the other traditional elements that weren't addressed. And when we got down to the results from the pen test, every single item that came out of that pen test report, we already had discovered in that threat model. We hadn't seen that report yet. So we're able to kind of look at it and get ahead of ourselves in the sense to be a lot more proactive. So the combination of the two together also help validate each other in terms of like, yeah, this was real. We did a pen test based on this output from a threat model. Yep, it is exploitable. So we get a better sense of improvement in posture over time. So those two working in collaboration together really helps us shore up the posture and the security of our products. So that's kind of my thoughts to add to that.
I like how you're saying they validate each other. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Because you need both. You can't just have one, only one track on this. You need to really have both and work together. But it had to have been like an amazing feeling that first time you saw those pen test results
Oh,
validate the.
yeah. It's pretty exciting. I'm like, yes, I figured it out, beforehand. So, we discover things now in the earlier stages where it's like in your design, you're missing something that we know you're going to need. And so we can address that. And we've had teams change their designs as a result of those outputs. So,
So when should threat modeling be introduced into the design process? Where in the software development lifecycle should threat modeling take place? Is it at the end? Is it at the very beginning? Or is it in the middle? Or is it a constant reoccurring thing that you're, reassessing often?
so I'll go ahead and start here. The whole threat model and its life cycle and what goes on lives with the application from its inception all the way through its release and revisions. When should I start? Well, now is what I like to think about. If I have a product, let's threat model. Let's start doing it. But effectively, anywhere you are in the stage of something is a good time to threat model. If you want to think about optimal situations, if I can get ahead of it when I'm start thinking about a product, that's a great place to be positioned. However, like I said too, we have those other places where we can inject, even if we're halfway through our build, if we're already running our security testing, there's times where it's just let's do that. And so I like to think of it as now, like wherever we're at, let's just make sure we include this as part of the process that we do.
Mm.
Yeah,
Robert,
yeah, I was going to say that's a great point. Just starting now, our typical answer is you start early,
Yeah.
right? So, but how early is early, and am I too late? That's typically the two things that I hear or questions I hear. Uh, when is too early, and am I too late? And reality is, when you're building or starting a new project, you may need to think about what is it? What is it you're working on?
Yeah.
What are we trying to do here? And so that's a good place to start. But even a little further in, let's say, for example, if you're following an agile methodology and you have a couple of sprints, 2 or 3 sprints, around that time is a good time to start and then continue on. But let's say I have an existing product and and I think most of my work that I've done over the years has been with existing products, with existing teams. They are much further along than just starting out. And I agree with John. Start whenever, wherever you are. It's not too late. You can then look at where you are. We're always making decisions. You can validate those decisions, go back and review,
Yep.
and then start where you are and then say, then the next thing we're going to do is look at this story. And the next thing we're going to do is look at this feature. So
Yep.
just start where you are, anywhere you are. It's not too late.
I like that. It's giving hope to people where you're not like, oh my God, I'm behind already. It's like you can start there, but you can start
Yep.
today and then just add it into your process, right? Because we understand,
Absolutely.
people on this call haven't started this process and probably have mature products. So today is the day, folks, where you can start this. And speaking of how to get started, are there tools or that help automate or guide threat modeling processes? Are there certain resources that people can look into that could help with, threat modeling for beginners? What have you guys found useful? Or what guidance would you give to someone who's looking at, how to start and what could be helpful?
Robert, you want to start off with this one? I know we
Yeah,
both got
sure.
a lot of
Sure.
thoughts around this.
Sure. I mean, I'd say that, I mean, the first thing we usually say is, John mentioned earlier about Adam Shostak uh, creating this 4-question framework. And that's where I usually start as well and point people to that. That's also in our manifesto that we put together in 2020 and adopted there. But basically, the four questions. What are we working on? What are we trying to do here? What are we concerned about? And also related to that is what are we working on now? Sometimes we can get overwhelmed. The system's too
Yeah.
big. How am I going to get started? Think about maybe breaking it down into just that one API or just that one process that you're concerned about. And so that might help you as well. And then next question is what can go wrong? That's where you start to identify threats. What could happen that we hadn't thought about? What are we going to do about it? That's where we're thinking about those mitigations and countermeasures. And then did we do a good enough job? You go back and review. Is there anything else that I hadn't thought about? Sometimes when you identify some threats, they might lead to other threats, or a mitigation might uncover another threat that you hadn't thought about. But ultimately, you get to a place where you say, I feel pretty comfortable about this. I'm at a good place. And so just those 4 questions alone are a good place to start to start thinking about threat modeling and how to apply it and use it as a guide. That's where I typically would say to get started as a tool, as a way to start thinking about threat modeling. John, you have some others?
Yeah, I was gonna, say the same thing, Robert. I mean, ultimately, the 4 questions that Adam has brought to us all is a good foundational way to approach threat modeling. And getting started is, going through those 4 questions about something that you're creating, and that can be done in many different ways. So you can sit down with a group of engineers and people. You can draw that out on a whiteboard. There's probably an existing process that you have in place in terms of your solution development stages. Somebody's creating a design somewhere. They might be whiteboarding it. They might be using something like Visio. They could just be typing it out as text. As far as I know, somebody could be at a late night restaurant with a napkin and they're writing down their idea about what it is that they want to make. So to start is like finding those moments in time and asking those questions whenever that occurs. And that's really kind of that goes in parallel with things. And that's kind of, I think we're going to talk about this here shortly about how does this fit into the scheme of things, right? So I'm a big fan of making sure that what we do fits into what we're already doing. So
And
I
I
think,
like that because you're also understanding better based off those 4 questions, not only your end goal of what you're trying to achieve, but also understanding what your environment and everything you have as is today. So that way you can find, tools or processes that really align to
yeah.
what you have already instead of trying to build something crazy or put in more effort where you could be more focusing on like the risk assessment or the improving your threat model.
And I think about tools when we think about some of the frameworks that are out there that can be leveraged. I think we'll probably talk about those here in a brief moment, but those are helpful too in terms of guiding people and getting started. And then of course you have automated tools that commercial and community projects that help with that process. But ultimately, I always think about threat modeling as a mind exercise. It's a thought and analytical exercise. Tools and frameworks, those are the things that help us get started. Those are the things that will help guide us along our way. But
It's a journey.
fundamentally, we're already doing it. And there's 4 questions that Adam puts out there and it's in the threat modeling manifesto. So
And we'll make sure we share the links with this after the webinar is over, but there's also the resource section at the bottom of the bar, so you can look into those resources now if you want. John, you alluded to this, as part of your answer to the last question in talking about how to get, everything in the grand scheme of things. But when we talk about this process, we're talking about developers, security engineers, product managers. How do we get everybody on the same page during one of, a threat modeling session? Because, you do need everybody to talk to each other. Everybody's got a different point of view, a different end goal. How do you get everybody to agree or be on the same page or really encourage people to participate in this type of exercise?
I think there's a lot of answers to this question. And, there's some organization that have policies written that says you have to threat model these applications, and it's like, okay, so now we have to do this. But a better approach, if we think about this, is finding this to be a common practice that integrates into what you already do. There are stages in development that you go through where this fits very nicely into that. Helping people to understand that this is not something that I'm asking you to go do separately. I'm asking you to add this to what you already do. So if you think about that, and then also really helping people understanding what it is and what are the benefits, the outcomes that you get, what is the value you gain from this? When people begin to see that and they understand that, it really becomes like, oh, why haven't we been doing this? And getting the right people involved is really understanding your organization to find the stakeholders that you need to have in place. Senior leadership support, grassroots support. There are all kinds of ways that you have to think about getting people involved. And really, it's just having some conversations about it and walking through some exercises. And that's when you begin that journey, people begin to understand what it is that we're talking about. And they'll find that value and benefit. And that's a key factor. Make sure you're delivering value as quickly as you can. So, I don't know, Robert, you got more things to add to that?
No, I think you covered it pretty well. I think just to highlight the value, when we talk about earlier, just getting started, you'll find, at least in my experience, you'll find that there's some value pretty quickly in just starting to have those conversations that maybe you didn't before,
Yeah.
and learning things. I've been in situations or in working with teams and sessions, doing a threat model where, as John was mentioning, you want to gather some folks together, not just one architect, not just one developer. Oh, go do the threat model for us and tell us what you found, but bringing people together and talking about some of these things, different threats and different things that could happen, is that everybody's learning. And I've seen situations again where somebody said, I didn't know that. I didn't know we did that. I didn't know that was a business rule that we're following, and the security implications of that. Or I thought it did something else. An architect says, well, this is how I designed it. And a developer says, but that's not how it's implemented because of whatever trade-off. And everybody learning, everybody growing from that understanding, and all the better for it, and more secure products. And so there's just a lot of value that comes out of just getting started. And so I would say very quickly and early on, note that value, and that'll help in terms of continuing on and helping others to say, hey, maybe I need to do that as well, or maybe I want to get in on that as well and see what you guys are doing.
Can you give me an example of someone who might be like midway through the journey as to what value they would get out of having these continuous conversations? So, you've mentioned we're continuously learning. Is there more of that, I didn't know it worked like that, when you're kind of midway or well on this journey? Or is it a different type of conversation that you're moving towards where it's new types of threats, or different scenarios? Can you just walk me through that a little bit?
Sure. Well, I think one thing is that many times somebody just starting out, they'll say, I'm still learning this. I'm still learning about the process. I'm trying to draw some diagrams, or maybe I'm trying to understand ways of identifying threats. And they may evaluate and say, I only found a few. And then they come back to it another time and they might find a few more. Or maybe they've done 2 or 3 threat models. And what you'll notice is, just like almost anything else, as you go through and you practice the
Mm.
activity, you get better at it. And what does that mean? It doesn't mean that you find hundreds of things or anything like that. It's more that your confidence in being able to identify threats, your confidence in being able to communicate those threats to others increases. And so that's where I think, midway through the experience with teams, if you're the leader or being a part of that team and building that security culture within your team, I think as you go along, that's what I see is that experience of that confidence of being able to identify threats and and you know improving the security of your system. John, what are your thoughts on that?
I'm right there with you, Robert, too. I know, we've had conversations about this a lot. And, we did the webinar series last year that you were on. We were talking about adoption and driving things and bringing things
Right.
together. But yeah, it's really about that learning, about understanding. And that helps us to get there. Right. And then we mature over time. You don't need perfection right off the bat. That's not the goal. Right. I think Adam had a recent post that he did that talked about, the perfection factor. It's like we're not going to be perfect, but that's not what we're trying to do. We're trying to understand what are the possibilities, what are the probabilities. And so the more you do it, it's just like anything in life. The more you do it, the better you become. Right. So and what's kind of nice too is that, when you have the group of folks that are doing this, their knowledge grows. They learn to ask more questions. They learn to dig a little deeper, and that's where those things come together. And yeah, so that's a little bit to add to it. So
That's great. Because yeah, I was just curious. I wanted to know what that middleman journey looked like. So thank you for clarifying that. Um, we've talked about what it is, what the journey looks like, different ways to get started, but can you tell me or help fill me in on what are some of the common mistakes teams make when they're starting this journey? Or what, even someone in the middle of it, what are some common mistakes that they're doing while threat modeling? Because we got to talk about that too.
yeah, I think one of the biggest things that we see that I've seen a lot of is around trying to do too much, um, and trying to take on things, so much all at one time. I have a massive enterprise application. Sometimes you do have to do the whole thing, right? But do it in chunks. You really have to kind of break things down for yourself in a more manageable way, because ultimately the outputs of your model are going to really matter. Do I want to give you 100 things to work on, or do I want to give you 3 things that are the most tangible, realistic things to do? And that's, like in any AppSec, program, if I run a scan on something, here's 300 findings. What do I do with that?
Yeah.
Absolutely nothing, right? It's like, okay, great. So what? Um, so a lot of times looking at outputs, I've seen this happen, and I've seen it recently, and this happens all too frequently. The app team is given this list, all these things, and it's like, I can't manage them. Then the business leader's like, nope, now we're not going to do this again.
Hmm.
So they don't want, they don't want to waste their time on that. So that mistake is handing over too much without tangible action. What do I really need to do? If I don't do that, and then it's really kind of it's never going to be adopted. It's going to be too much. So that's, I think, one of the biggest mistakes I see all the time.
Unfortunate when you put it like that, where it's like you could have handled it a little
Yeah.
bit better, but it was
Here's
just
here's
two
10.
bite-sized chunks. Yeah,
Here's 10 things. Go work on this.
that's crazy. Robert, what about you?
I think a couple things, and this also sort of comes from the manifesto as well. But one of them is this analysis paralysis,
Mm.
is just getting way over focused on the minutia. And so, one thing I'll say, many times when I'm conducting a threat model with a team is I'll say, first of all, this is not a code review. We're not going into the code. We're looking more at the bigger picture and trying to understand how things are connected and understanding our attack surfaces, areas where where's our input? Is it a file that's coming in that we're reading? And just break it down in more simple ways versus trying to analyze every single thing, because
Mm.
you're just not. You're not. It's not going to be perfect, and that's okay. And so I think analysis paralysis, where you're focused more on the problem and not really thinking about what are the practical and relevant solutions here? And I think that's what John was pointing to
Yeah.
is not the 300 things that I need to focus on, but what are a few things that I can do right now that'll make a big difference and bring some value. And so a bit of that, that analysis paralysis and over focusing. The other thing I'll mention, and I alluded to this earlier, is that it's not one person doing it all. Uh,
Mhm.
Only one person can do threat modeling. No, 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 no. What I've seen in my experience is that once you learn it and you start to practice it, anybody can do this, and
Yeah.
many do. I've seen those who say, I don't really have a technical background, but they learn about threat modeling and go, oh, I actually can see a few things here and ask good questions and contribute. Absolutely. And so it's not just one person. And so that's another thing I've seen is, oh, let's just have that one person on our team. They do all the threat models. No, 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 no. It's a group effort. It's a team effort. Everybody can contribute. And if you don't do that, then what you have, unfortunately, is then just that one person's knowledge and experience. And while good, they don't know everything. None of us knows everything. And that's where, again, the team effort comes in and is really helpful. So that's another thing is don't focus on just one person doing it all, but instead as a team is going to be really helpful across the board.
In both of the answers that in just kind of the conversation today, it's made me think a little bit of the Phoenix Project, where you're talking about all the different people who are a part of it. I know we're talking specifically threat modeling, but you're just talking about the different departments involved, and resources and who participates. So it kind of made me think a little bit about that, how it really is a team sport when it comes to something like threat modeling.
You,
Absolutely.
you, you can't get it done without all the right stakeholders in place. If it's just one person's perspective, it's only their understanding of the product, you lose out on a lot, So it's really important to have the solution engineers, having the right security folks at the table. Maybe it's the DevOps engineers. It'd be the business in terms of understanding the business aspect. So without understanding these things, you can make a model, but is it going to be the best model? Well, that's very debatable and things and what you can produce. It's still value, but however, it's like we want to make our value even more. We wanted to mature that. So those are the things that we do. I just want to add a really quick thing. We talk about those things that we see, and I was talking about before, like you get too much. One of the things that we like to do is when we look at what it is, we pick key areas of what we want to focus our attacks and threats on, so that way we can really break that down in a much more tangible way. So I just wanted people to understand it's like if I look at all this big, huge design, what's important here, as Robert, you mentioned the attack surface, focus on some key areas based on criteria like the business function, the data. What am I protecting here? Where does it move? Where is it stored? Things of that nature. Where do the primary functions happen? That if something goes wrong, that's where we run into the most trouble. So, looking at that and trying to keep that, and that avoids the analysis paralysis. We just think about what's the important parts.
And just, I know I didn't write this question down, so I'm throwing you a new question, but we'll see how it goes, folks. Um, when you're doing that type of grouping, does it also help give you insight into where there potential might be like duplicate type problems or
Yes.
issues?
Yeah,
Okay.
we do
So you're,
find that.
so you're freeing up some resources then, maybe?
Yeah, a lot of times you'll find things that are common across multiple things, multiple products, within the product in itself and things like that. So absolutely.
Yeah.
Awesome. It's a smart way to do it then. So folks at home, make sure you group things. What about how do you measure the effectiveness of your threat model? I mean, I feel like the easy answer is, nothing bad has happened, but there's got to be, I'm sure, a hard metric that you guys are looking at.
Um, I'll jump in here on this, and this is kind of the fun one. To really understand is it effective is when you look at that validation stages. If my model shows this
Mm.
particular vulnerability or weakness, did my scan find the same thing? Did my pen test find the same thing? If it's still existing by the time you're pen testing, then you haven't done anything about it. And so really what it boils down to is the work gained from the threat model is there to help you avoid that. So I think that that's kind of where you go and things about making sure that things are effective is, do we have controls that are working for us? And are those controls specific to a product, or are those controls specific to maybe a group of products, or a way that you just build things in general? Because you learn that as you progress through and you scale more. So Robert, I'm sure you've got some more thoughts on that too.
Yeah, I would say I absolutely agree. John is seeing the proof, if you will, and I
Yeah,
also recommend a lot of times, if you're doing a pen test, get a threat model first,
yeah,
uh, as a way of thinking about not just from the outside, where a pen test only looks or mostly looks on the outside and how the
yep,
business works and so forth, but as a team, you understand the inside, and so that helps you understand quite a bit, and then you can validate that. But the other thing I would also say in terms of measuring is, it's one of those hard to measure in some ways, but the culture itself,
Mhm.
the security knowledge increasing, people talking about and concern about security first and secure design first. I think seeing that and hearing that from people as they talk, that's one thing certainly, but you could also just look at numbers of threat models completed. Although some people say, well, were they perfect? No. But did we put some together? Yes. Did we have more than we did a month ago, 3 months ago, a year ago? Yes. Well, then we're improving. We're moving along. You can get a little bit better in terms of, certainly fine tuning and saying, okay, what are we finding? Are we determining some good things here? Are we determining that we make some good decisions, or are we improving our decisions? Certainly you can take a look at that. But I think taking all that together is what's going to help you with metrics and measuring uh, people improving their security knowledge, people understanding how threat models work and building
Mhm.
them, uh, improving what we're sending over for pen tests, and as well as, of course, when we're doing the scans, when we're doing the final tests, that we're finding fewer vulnerabilities. And that's not a direct one-to-one, but it's certainly, I've
yeah.
seen it come out that way, that overall our security posture has improved as a result of
Yeah.
thinking about secure design through threat modeling and improving the overall foundation and structure of what we're doing.
I just add a little bit more. So that's a great point about the reduction of vulnerabilities that we. Um, in a previous webinar that I did, I was with Brooke Schoenfeld, and we talked about like what is an effective measure, right? I want to know, like, knowing the amount of threat models and the increasing of threat models is really good. However, what does that really tell me? What I really want to know is, did the outputs of that model make us think about and implement new controls to
Mhm.
protect things? Because if I'm making changes as a result of the outputs of the model, I'm improving my security posture. So is it effective? Yeah. A recent model we did, it was the same thing. We discovered some design issues. They went and implemented those controls. So that is something that if you can measure that, and measuring things can be complicated and it's kind of hard to do sometimes, but understanding like that reduction of vulnerabilities as well as the controls implemented as a result from these outputs, because that's where you really know you're gaining the most, some of the most value. It's one of those value data points that you get, like we're doing something with this, so its
Yeah.
effectiveness is growing and maturing.
So, can you give me a real world example of where threat modeling has prevented a significant either vulnerability or attack?
I'll let you answer that, John.
Yeah, I'm thinking about this and just thinking about some of the things that we've discovered that we had to go and do. There was an application last year, it was mobile, and looking at how it works. And there were things that we discovered that had we not done those, I think we would have encountered some problems based on its, there's a hybrid architecture design in the mobile application and how it functions. And that was one of the reasons why we were brought in. It was because of the very big concern over what the product was for and how it was being used and what domain and space it was for. But basically, there were things that when we discovered that, it was like, oh my goodness, we need to do these controls. because we knew working with threat intel teams around like, hey, what's the chatter going on? What's happening out there about this particular type of product for the type of use that it was for? But basically, it was like that's where the concern came from. So that's why we came in, and it's really around making sure we do those. Another short example is a recent product that we did threat model was they were lacking controls. There were some things there that was like, yeah, you have this, but that's not going to be enough in terms of how that works. So that goes back to what I previously said about making changes and implementing things as a result of those outputs. And when teams go and do that, that puts us in a better position to prevent those things from happening. I hope that answers the question there. Now, Robert, if you want to add to that.
Yeah, mine is typically around some confusion on authentication versus authorization, and mixing those two and say, well, I'm authenticated, I must be authorized as well, and it's not. That's not the same thing. I've seen that, for example, an API that was doing a little bit strange way of authorizing well, authentication and authorization. They were doing both, and a little bit different than we would expect. And it turned out it was a major issue, and it had not been caught by any tools that were scanning or anything like that. It just, oh, it looks fine to us. But when we talked with the team and understood their design and how they were doing this work, again, sort of what John said, the controls were inadequate, and so they needed to fix those. Another one, and I recommend teams also threat model your supply chain, your CI/CD pipeline, your
Yes.
ways that are things that you say, well, I'm just looking at my product and I'm just looking at development. But no, the ways that you're putting things together, where are those third-party libraries come from, and so forth. Times that I've worked with teams on that, where they take a step back and look at their process, we've found some instances where some files were coming in that didn't realize they were potentially compromised, or some places where they thought good authentication was in place, it wasn't, or passwords were completely open and passed around, and they thought, well, that's not what we're doing in test environment, but it turns out that's what we're doing for production. Things like that I've seen, and just asking those questions, and not so obvious in doing a scan. But when you're asking questions and understanding the process, the business processes and so forth, and applying some these techniques that we're talking about, what could go wrong? What are we working on? And so on, can uncover some of those things. And now you have some good solutions. So I've seen those as well.
Yeah. I noticed
So
we have a question in the Q&A.
I was just about to say that. So
Yeah,
we
I'd
had a
like to.
good.
Yeah, I could take this one here. The 4 questions include what could go wrong. Won't the answer to that for a given class of systems always be the same old list of vulnerabilities? Continue to say, do you have a checklist for those common vulnerabilities? Well, it's not always the same old vulnerabilities, right? We have things such as like, oh, we need to put MFA in place. Oh, our authentication authorization.
Yeah.
However, when you look at the logical design and data flows, when you're building your threat model, that gives you more insight into functionality and importance of things. Those vulnerabilities might be something that has more of a business logic issue rather than a typical like, oh, I got to patch the system, as an example. Robert, as you talked about an API, that's a great place. Like, is that API doing something that it shouldn't be doing? Is its permissions excessive? Now we know about excessive permissions, but however, what do we look at from that design perspective? Why are you using this one API to do everything? If I exploit that one API, guess what? Now I can do everything, as opposed to how you build things. It might be better to separate those out in a way to deal with that. So you'll find commons, and that goes to the next part of the question is around, do we create a checklist? What I find is that we create a threat library as a result of what we discover. And that threat library, we begin to understand more how it applies to the products we build. So the first part of that question and what we do feeds into the second part, where we're able to build a list of threats that we can always refer to when looking at certain types of products or constructs. So, but it's not a checklist. I don't check the box looking for this, this, and this. That's a security requirements thing. To me, that's how I see that.
Mm.
Right.
So I
Yeah.
know we're,
I'm
oh,
sorry,
go
go
ahead,
ahead.
Robert. No,
Oh, no,
go.
just very quickly, I would say, just to echo what John is saying, is it really comes down to understanding the business processes. There are certain things that, in terms of well-known vulnerabilities to look
Yeah.
for and patch, well-known issues with certain systems, whether it's mobile, cloud, and so on. Just do those. Don't even think, just do those.
Yeah.
But then what do you do beyond that? What's a business process and maybe multi-steps that could potentially compromise if any of those went wrong? That's where a threat model can really bring value that just simply following all the standard lists may
Yeah.
not uncover. And so that's really where a lot of the work happens, that threat models can provide uh, a lot of value and benefits. And so and like John said, you'll start to build those lists, or those libraries, rather, those threat libraries. You'll start to understand the various patterns that you're using, the various frameworks you're using, and certain threats that are coming up each and every time that we start to build this again.
Yeah.
But then uncover those that are related to the business processes and systems, and that's going to really help you out a lot.
It'll make a difference. That kind of separates it from the traditional assessment versus threat modeling when you take into consideration those kinds of things.
So we do have one last question. I know we're almost at the top of the hour, but how can we do a threat modeling for open source softwares? For example, this is maintained by third-party people, but I'm integrating that into my system and I don't have any control on it. So how can we start this for OSS?
I'll give it over to you, Robert.
Okay. Well, in my experience, you're right. You don't have control over it, and so your threat model is that I am pulling in some third-party libraries, and almost every product out there does, so it's not unusual. But your threat model is, I don't have direct control over this, but what do I have? I maybe have some information about how they're doing security in some way. Maybe I understand that they have security updates every couple of weeks, every few months. I keep track of those. So your threat model is, I don't have direct control, but here's how I react to it. So what are we working on? I'm working on a product that has open source software. What could go wrong? There's some kind of security vulnerability. What do I do about it? I keep track of what's there. I scan it. I do what I need to do to at least have some confidence that the team is updating it. I'm aware of what vulnerabilities I know about, as well as what they're publishing. So that's your threat model, and keeping track of it. So do what you can, but obviously know your limitations of what you can't. And that's, again, part of your threat model.
Yeah.
So, John, Robert, thank you so much for taking the time to be here with me today and answer these questions, burning questions I've had and questions from the community. For those of you at home, free resources, to Robert's point, when we were just talking about open source and understanding these libraries, we do have a free resource here in the Spectra Collective or Spectra Assure community, where it's secure.software, where you can go look up these packages for free. So we categorize them on a few different categories. We go beyond vulnerabilities, including malware, licensing, hardening, and tampering. But other, relevant resources to today's conversation is going to be that threat modeling manifesto, threat modeling capabilities documents, as well as OWASP threat modeling playbook and OWASP SAM. So please feel free to download those resources from the from the resource section in your Zoom toolbar. Lastly, I just wanted to share we have some more insights coming up with just a few white papers and reports. But we'll see you guys next month, third Tuesday of the month, as always, for our community webinar where we'll be learning something new. Robert and John, thank you so much. This was great.
Hey, Katie, can I add one last thing for a resource?
Yes, please do.
Threat Modeling Connect is a organization that is a bunch of industry folks talking about threat modeling. I know both Robert and I are founding members of that organization. It's a free resource for everyone. Join in, ask your questions. They host the Threat ModCon conference every year that coincides with OWASP AppSec. So Threat Modeling Connect is a great place to reach out to as well.
And a hackathon. They do a threat
Yeah,
modeling
oh, they
hackathon,
do a yearly hackathon. Yeah.
a yearly one, yep, as well.
And will you guys be at ThreatModCon this year in DC?
Yes.
Will I be seeing
Yes.
you in October?
Yes.
Yes.
Yep.
Perfect.
November, I think, right? But yeah, we'll see.
November.
All
I always get
right,
it
we'll be there,
confused.
so look us up.
Yeah, definitely.
All right. Thanks for connecting, and till next time, guys.
All right. Thank you all.
Thank you.
All right, bye.